Hello, dear friends. How are you? Welcome. Thank you for joining me here. I'm Einherjar, and today I would like to talk about, as an answer to a question posed by one of my patrons, talk about the celebration of the Feast of the Einherjar, or Day of the Einherjar, as it is also known, and if indeed this is a pagan celebration or something of the remains of the Nazi propaganda. Well, as you might imagine, given what I just said. And also in this channel this year, 2025, it's been in here quite a lot of videos debunking a lot of conceptions and agreed upon ideas, common knowledge, and sharing with you the origins of quite a lot of misconceptions. Well, you already know where this is going, right? Now, just before delving into this subject, I would just like to make a disclaimer of sorts, or at least underline a point which I think it is necessary, lest people misunderstand the situation here and my words, or twist my words. I think that many of us, and probably and unfortunately practically the entire world's population, we have had at least one person in the family who either witnessed war or fought in a war. Certainly, many of us have witnessed conflict or have been victims of conflict and violence in some way, battle, military crisis, or other types of armed conflicts. Speaking for myself, I have never participated in a war, nor have I ever seen a large-scale war up close, right? But I have witnessed and participated in conflicts, been a victim of violence, and I also inflicted violence. Many of my ancestors actively participated in conflicts and wars as warriors, knights, and soldiers throughout my family's history, at least as far back as historical records show, in my case, from the beginning of the medieval period to the present day. More recently, I had relatives who died fighting or have survived the First World War, the Second World War, and other conflicts that followed between the 1970s and 1990s. I knew some of these survivors, right? Some soldiers, others of higher ranks. I saw in these people that for them the war never actually ended, and I don't know what's truly the worst thing, like dying in war or surviving it, but never achieving a concrete victory because the trauma persists internally and they have to live with that for the rest of their lives. I had family members who fought on both sides of the war, let's say, or on the good side and the bad side, so to speak. In the violence caused by conflict, there is never a victory. You never truly win, even when fighting to overthrow and end an oppressive power. Subsequent generations may live in peace, surely, and in a way not suffer what previous generations have suffered from and had to go through in war to defend the future, but the violence is so great that the trauma of survivors passes on to subsequent generations. And in one way or another, a society collectively, and in the family nucleus as well, carries this trauma. It's like throwing a stone into a lake, right? There's a great impact in the middle, but it forms ripples that have their effects as they spread and can disrupt everything they hit and agitate things. As I said, I never participated in a war, but I have participated and I have witnessed conflict in other forms. In my opinion, there is never truly a victory, even if the opponent is defeated. Many times in life, we are forced into violence, even when we disagree with it. There are limits to everything. And violence should often only be what happens after a major crisis when all other methods have been tried and failed. But unfortunately, reality is not like that. Unfortunately, we as human beings quickly and easily choose to directly cause violence in this illusion that it will solve something. And the only people I have known who truly enjoy causing violence are psychopaths or those with other mental illnesses, clearly. And there is a real difference between a soldier being obliged to serve and fulfill their duty in some conflict and those who take advantage of their position to commit atrocities. Although I believe that many people indeed have genuine goodness within them and that given the right or the wrong, but in this case the right circumstances, that they are also capable of great violence, I also know that there are human beings who, although thankfully fewer in number, are purely evil, just evil, and there's nothing we can do about it. Now, I see that in relation to neopaganism, there are some celebrations that glorify warriors in a very romanticized way. Just as there is a romanticization of ancestors and ancestor worship in New Age spiritualities, especially spiritualities with European cultural roots. There is, where it is purposefully forgotten that every human being had evil ancestors as well, murderers, rapists, criminals, tyrants, etc. In these New Age spiritualities, celebrations of the warriors and the warrior spirit are a smaller and more specific facet of the romanticization of ancestor worship. Therefore, we purposefully forget our warrior ancestors who caused more violence than it was necessary due to the circumstances that forced them to do so. We forget those who very much committed war crimes, raped, killed indiscriminately, tortured and killed for pleasure. Monsters that we all had in our ancestral lineage. As I mentioned earlier in a video about the ancestors, actually a few years back, a video about the ancestors and their perception, the perception of the ancestors in animism, not all ancestors are worthy of being remembered, let alone venerated or honored or worshipped. Furthermore, in many animistic beliefs, not all the dead become ancestors. Being an ancestor is seen as a category of the dead, the once human person that was alive, a veneration given to an important person who contributed something beneficial to the community in life. After death, the community still has this need and desire that the deceased continues to bring something beneficial, and therefore, through rituals, celebrations, and cyclical offerings and cyclical rituals, this deceased person becomes an ancestor and continues acting as an ancestor to continue serving the community of the living. Therefore, let's not glamorize or romanticize ancestor worship, and by extension, romanticize ancestral warriors. Not all are worthy of being remembered, much less honored. Honor and remember those who, despite the circumstances of their lives, did their best to be good people and bring something positive to the world, their community, and to their families. As I said before in some other video in the past, the werewolf cult. A good person is not a harmless person. A good person is a very dangerous person who knows perfectly well the destruction they are capable of causing and inflicting, but nevertheless does everything within their power to control this aspect and be a peaceful and a good person for their own good and the good of others, for a greater good. So, in my opinion, right, celebrations to warriors should indeed be conducted towards the spirit involved in actions of bravery to fight against forces and persons that are determined to oppress and subjugate humanity to their will by taking away freedom and actively fighting against life itself by causing destruction, death, and misery just to achieve their own self-serving goals. Again, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, celebrations towards the warrior spirits should be conducted towards the ethics and moral values that led people into acts of bravery to fight and stop all forces that exist only to destroy life. So let's not romanticize things. Anyone who has suffered from and or caused violence knows perfectly well what I'm talking about. Unless, of course, that person finds joy in committing violence. But I'm not here speaking all these words towards monsters. Monsters will never understand the meaning of such words. Now, dear friends, let's move into today's subject, if you please. So, Feast of the Einherjar was never a celebration held in pre-Christian Scandinavian belief systems. It's not ancestral, it's not historical in the sense of having been celebrated by late Iron Age and medieval or Old Norse people in Scandinavia, the so-called Viking Age. The Feast of the Einherjar is most commonly celebrated on the 9th of November, but in the US, the also through Folk Assembly passed this celebration into the 11th of November to celebrate along with Veterans Day, which they have called it Einherjar Blot, the sacrifice to the Einherjar, which then led some modern heathens and some modern people within Ásatrú to celebrate this in honor of their own veterans. Well, the Ásatrú Folk Assembly and other earlier Ásatrú New Age spiritualities since the 1970s, knew perfectly well what this stands for. Everyone knows if you know about Nazi history and political propaganda and ideologies. Feast of the Einherjar, as I said, was originally held on the 9th of November. For those who might not know, the Einherjar were the fallen warriors, the best of the best, chosen from the battlefield by the god Odin to use them in the final conflict at Ragnarok. But, as I said, there was actually never a feast or celebration towards the Einherjar. I'm not going to develop in this video about the Einherjar, there's plenty to say about it. In fact, the concept of the Einherjar seems to have been elaborated from the Roman glorification of the gladiators and the Roman propaganda around such performances, which influenced several societies, but lies in the basis of glorifying and romanticizing prowess in combat and to be remembered in histories as a great warrior, skilled warrior, which was used as war propaganda to encourage young men to serve and fight and die. The later poetic embellishments in Old Norse literary sources about the Einherjar departs from propaganda aimed at young men to get them to enlist as foot soldiers in a group or army of a lord, king, war chief, or someone whose power depended on men for armed conflict activities. Only in modern times, in the 20th century, someone decided to create this celebration towards the Einherjar on the 9th of November. But who decided to create that celebration and why in this specific day? That's the question, at least from my patron. I think you already know, right? We already know it's not an ancestral tradition, and it cannot even be called a modern reconstruction, but rather a modern invention aimed to perpetuate the 1930s ideologies of Nazi Germany. You see, the 9th of November is the date of the failed coup, or an attempt to overthrow a government suddenly and violently in Munich in 1923, when Hitler tried to emulate the March on Rome. He failed, right? But he transformed that defeat into a myth, the Day of the Martyrs of the Movement, or Day of Remembrance for the Fallen of the Movement, was born. And from 1933 onwards, the Third Reich held mass rallies, torchlight processions, and blood oaths on that day. There was no talk of Einherjar, mind you, but rather of sacrifice, homeland, and heroism, the same symbolism that surrounds the warriors of Odin. It is not a coincidence, but a symbolic strategy. This is still done very much today by many presidents and governments to create symbolism out of a failure to pass on an illusion, to create a martyr out of an insignificant person, to feed an ideology, to secure power, to create a symbol of power out of a failure, to bury the truth and create a lie that becomes an alternative reality, and then taken as the truth, the more that lie is fed and given life to it until it becomes reason to celebrate. From this failure was created a day where the Nazi Party honored its fallen members and promoted the narrative of sacrifice for their revolution. This commemoration was a key part of Nazi propaganda with public ceremonies. Now, neopaganism took advantage of this and appropriated this date. November the 9th does not appear in any medieval Nordic sources. The date was adopted by neo-pagan groups inclined to some Old Norse aspects of past belief systems in the late 20th century, many, if not all, indeed linked to racialist ideologies, along with the use of Nordic symbols that have been related with extremist ideologies, as has been said here before many times. I even gave an example more recently, several examples throughout the history of this channel. I mean, you don't specifically choose this day for speeches concerning sacrifice, homeland and heroism and the ancestors and whatnot out of nowhere. Groups such as Ausather Folk Assembly and others specifically chose this day given its connotations from Nazi Germany, racial ideologies and propaganda. I mean, what better day to commemorate fallen warriors within groups that have consequently, many times before, shown they are in line with extremist ideologies, if not indeed this very day ritualized by Nazism. Coincidence my ass. Of course, that doesn't mean that celebrating the Einherjar makes you a Nazi. Of course not. Or indeed continue to celebrate the Einherjar on this day doesn't make you a Nazi. The same way, it doesn't make you a Nazi to celebrate the Einherjar on the 11th of November on Veterans Day in the US. However, to ignore the context in which this modern neo-pagan celebration was created and why and the ideologies behind that led to the very creation of this celebration is a thing to be concerned about. You have to understand what is implied when you are celebrating a specific date and its origins. It's like celebrating Columbus Day and realizing that you are celebrating a person that committed mass murder of indigenous peoples and committed several crimes against humans and against life itself. Why is that even still a thing? I mean, honor the Einherjar, honor the dead, honor the fallen soldiers, honor whatever you want. But not only do not romanticize the dead and warriors, but also pay special attention to the ideologies that led to this specific modern celebration and others, right? It's no coincidence that heathen groups that focus on the actual history of Scandinavian pre-Christian belief systems and are against extremist ideologies, they do not include Feast of the Einherjar or Day of the Einherjar in their celebrations. People need to be conscious about history and the origins of the things they celebrate and why. So, my dear friends, I do hope this was useful, may it help you in any possible way, and may it be an eye-opener, because this type of propaganda is still very much happening right in front of our eyes in our very societies today. Thank you so much for watching, see you on the next video, and as always, tack för idag. Thanks for today. Obrigado por hoje. Until we meet again, my dear friends.